In my friend's PMD world, I DM a continent known as Mansa. In the present-day timeline, there are 4 nations of Phoenix, Caravista, Trista, and Playesta. Each one of them have been shaped in some way by a great calamity that took place a century ago within Playesta's subregion. That is where our story is focused on. This is the story of the Timber Wars. Before the 4 nations existed, the center of civilization in Mansa lay in the grass fields and great oak forests of the southwestern subregion where Playesta is now today. There were 5 kingdoms: Ontario, Maltona, Planora, Stella, and Estera. The Kingdom of Ontario is a thriving and robust nation. Under the leadership of an Arcanine known as Galileo II, life has never been better. Ontario spent the last 3 decades building nickel, copper, and iron mines in large mountain towns. The nation has a large presence of fire and ground types, giving the civilization an edge. Where others still barely centralizing past the era of guilds, Ontario's Pokemon population has a natural ability to refine metals right away and made them the powerhouse of the region. There is one great rival to Ontario, and that is Maltona. Maltona is led by King Lucius the First, a Noctowl who has built a much more federal kingdom, one that integrates and continues to have the guilds be a large part of one's life. Maltona also resides within the timberous forest and held a near monopoly for production of timber in the region, which left them with a large amount of political power. Their population mostly consists of grass and flying types, and were excellent woodsmen. I'll quickly go over the other kingdoms. Planora is a small mini Maltona in a sense, so finds itself on a large plateau in which they specialize in creating charcoal and had population that mostly consists of grass and electric types. Stella is a city-state that was home to the Arcana Guilds, which is a newer guild type that encourages Pokemon to question the world around them and learn. They are a pacifist nation, comprised of psychic and dark types. Finally, Estera is an agricultural nation, the breadbasket to the majority of the region, hosting huge plantations that produces wines, cotton, wheat, barley, and oats. All nations lived in peace with each other until Ontario attacked. Up to this point, Ontario was led by Galileo, but one day, assassins came into the castle and murdered the late Arcanine in his sleep. This meant that a young Growlithe by the name of Lucius was forced to take the throne. With his father dead, King Lucius the Sixth was crowned King of Ontario with a silver crown in the center of Firestone, which upon crowning evolves him into an Arcanine. King Lucius left with the kingdom in turmoil, and at the young age of 18 had to figure out how to navigate everything. First issue was the question of legitimacy. King Lucius was born not from the queen, but from one of his father's mistresses, but was proclaimed a legitimate heir by the king. The second problem was that of the timber trade. Things were going tense between Ontario and Maltona, with Ontario builders encroaching on Maltona's borders, and Maltona building a small town known as Takasa, which means your home in Romanian, as a statement to Ontario. Now Maltona is halting the vital timber trade to Ontario and pressuring Planora to follow them in cutting Ontario off as well. Fearful for his life and his kingdom's well-being, Lucius makes a decision. First, he makes a heartless decision and orders assassins to eliminate his younger siblings, so no coup or civil war was possible. They did as the king told them. Then he rallied the kingdom. They will end Maltona's monopoly over the timber trade and expand the borders of Ontario. This action set off a chain of events that will be known as the Timber Wars. Ontario led a surprise offensive to Maltona's eastern borders. They overran and burned Takasa to the ground before they attacked the Divinus Keep, a large fortification that was built by Maltona thanks to the current tensions. It is an impressive stone castle that both block any from entering Planora's spears and block any from entering Maltona's spear. King Lucius knew, as did everyone else, if he fails to take this keep, the war is already lost. So he split his army into 2, letting the Crown's guard Flavius Silva, a Lycanroc, lead an assault on the front gates, while King Lucius' detachment went around, flanking the defenses and led a surprise assault from the rear. This is enough to quickly overwhelm the garrison, making them believe they are facing a much larger army than there really is, and with the promise of safety, open the gates and surrender. With this, the gates to Maltona were open and Ontario's army pummeled into desolate legions. I could go into every battle how I took ancient combat traditions as the Failings, Mana Poles, and my personal favorite, Cohorts, then went through different types of Pokemon, the world of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon with the items it holds and whatnot to create battle tactics. If I did that, I would be here all day, so if you want to see that, leave a comment. Could be a future video, I mean, who knows? Anyways, Maltona's army of grass and flying types found itself pretty outmatched against the armored fire and ground type armies Ontario brought to the field. Of course, this war interrupted the timber trade, and always being close allies, Planora joins the war. They launched their own raid across the Divinus River to attack Ontario's own heartland. This would not be a very successful campaign, and Planora got bogged down in an endless siege on the eastern banks of the river, and struggled to maintain supply lines across the Divinus thanks to Ontario holding the key. Estera sympathizes with Maltona and Planora, especially after getting reports of Ontario's armies burning down villages and towns. Estera decided to cut Ontario off from their grain trade. If they did not make peace, famine would quickly grip Ontario if they didn't do something. Yet between them and Estera was the kingdom of Stella. Desperate, King Lucius falls further to the dark side and orders a surprise attack on the pacifist nation of scholars. They didn't stand much of a chance, and in the fighting, fire broke out within the city's arcane section, leading to the burning of their great libraries and universities, destroying countless records of histories, discoveries, and ideas that could advance them all to the next stage of civilization. Estera employs a scorched earth strategy, burning their massive plantations as their peasants evacuate to Estera's walled capital. This forced Ontario's armies to be delayed. However, within Stella, the army found a hidden alchemist mixture. This mixture is said to create an eternal blaze, like that of the deity they worshipped, a bird with wings of fire. They took this knowledge and brought it to King Lucius in Maltona. In Maltona, Ontario has obtained control of their capital, forcing the Noctowl and his army to resort to hit-and-run attacks in an attempt to attrition them out. Lucius was frustrated. They won the war. Let the fighting end. When the soldiers brought him knowledge of this internal blaze, he orders for it to be used on the forest, that they will use it to force Maltona's army out to either surrender or die. Well, I feel this is a lesson of if I can't have it, no one can. Just more on an extreme level. As you expect, an eternal blaze being set off at the timberous forest created a massive inferno. One in which Ontario's armies had to retreat from Maltona as the fire spreads not from just the forest, but into the wooden cities of Maltona. The devastation was immense, and the blaze, ever hungry, consumed everything in its path. The fire spread with such speed it managed to jump the Divinus into Planora's own forest, setting ablaze the only two forests in this whole subregion. The oldest forest in the world with untold mysteries and dungeons to explore, all wiped out in the blaze of war. To say the other kingdoms were horrified would be an understatement. Kingdom of Maltona is gone, and no one has seen Decius and his army since the blaze. Their cities burned to the ground, their future snuffed out. The war continues, but the flight from Maltona, much equipment had to be left behind, and Planora's 3-year-long siege in the west finally came to an end, with Planora taking control of an important fortification. From there, they began marching all across Ontario's western towns, taking out revenge on their peasants. Estera's army would rush out once Ontario's forces led by Flavius reached the capital. Hungry, having to march through endless fields of grass with no food or water, they are overwhelmed and defeated. Flavius is never seen again, and the army tries to retreat but is turned into a full rout. With Planora invading from the west and Estera from the south, it was only a matter of time. King Lucius, the now 21-year-old king, would make a final stand at the gates of his capital, but the two armies, now converging as one, would overwhelm him. King Lucius will die on the battlefield, and Ontario's cities are burned to the ground in revenge. Vengeance taken out, all that is left is the kingdom of Planora and Estera. What followed next is known as the Great Hunger and the Great Collapse. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. There is much more PMD content to come, as we are now just fully delving into the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon arc of this channel. So stay tuned. Have a great rest of your day and have fun adventuring out there. Bye!